Welcome, welcome, come on in. The show's about to begin. Grab your seat and feel the nostalgia grow. Sit tight, relax, and enjoy the ride. We're so glad you're here. Let's go. It's time for Let's Play with AppleMatt.
This here's the boarding house. Now, if you were a wandering cowboy, miner, or salesman type, you could rest your head here for $6 or $7 a week. Of course, that just got you a bed and one big dorm room with a bunch of other buckaroos. If you were hungry enough to eat a saddle blanket, you could have all your meals here for an extra $8 weekly. Most residents drew their water up from a well by working a pump like this. An indoor pump wasn't the lap of luxury, but it sure beat hauling water in buckets from a well or a pump outdoors. A simple straw broom was all a woman had to sweep the dirt from her house, and the wind blowing across the unpaved streets brought plenty of dirt indoors. Wyatt Earp might have used a broom like this. When the law and order business was slow, he repaired streets for the town of Tombstone and removed the bodies of dead animals. People kept their water cool by storing it in a large clay pot called a crock. The water didn't always taste fresh and wasn't always clean. Diseases carried through the water took a lot of lives back in Wyatt Earp's time. Some say Wyatt's first wife died of cholera or yellow fever, which she might have caught drinking stale water. Others say she died in childbirth. People would use an ice box like this to keep their food cold. They put a large bucket of ice inside, which was quite expensive, and a pan under the ice box to catch the dripping water. To get the ice to town, it was wrapped in straw and brought from the mountains in freight wagons. If a person didn't have an ice box, or the one they had wasn't big enough, they kept their dairy goods down the well in a bucket or stored food in a cool cellar. A cupboard like this would store crocks of beef and pork pickled in brine and cans of cooking fat. Food was greasy back in the Old West. Meat fried in oil, bread dipped in bacon grease, potatoes cooked with lard. Even vegetables were usually fried. People thought a high-fat diet was healthy and gave a person the energy needed for a day of hard physical labor. Boarders usually ate together at a long table. Foods like stewed beef and chicken with dumplings were the main fare, since there weren't a lot of vegetables. Boarding houses often attracted the more respectable folk like ministers and school teachers, traveling salesmen. Still, good food mixed with a table of hungry people doesn't make a pretty combination. Perhaps you've heard of the boarding house reach? On shopping day, a boarding house landlady would lay in enough supplies to fill several cupboards like this one. There'd be cocoa, coffee, sugar, cakes of yeast. And it wouldn't be cheap, since the cost of shipping kept the price of food high. Cabbage and 2 pounds of corned beef could cost 35 cents. And this was when the average man would earn $3 a day. It's about $60 a month, if he could get steady work. Inside a butter churn like this were paddles attached to a pole. The cream was poured in and stirred until it thickened into butter. A tiring chore that could take an hour. Salt was also added so the butter would keep longer. A woman would set aside the whole day to bake things like coarse bread made from the heavily sifted flour, and more commonly biscuits. People were suspicious of things they didn't cook themselves, but it wasn't anything personal against the bakers, since people weren't sure about canned goods either. Boarding houses saw folks from all walks of life, and coat racks like this one saw all kinds of coats. Overcoats, Macintoshes, and riding dusters for men and women would be hung here. Children were kept in a cradle like this one, but, sad to say, childhood diseases and frontier hardships made it likely that a couple would lose at least one of these children before it was grown. Wyatt and Josie Earp had 2 children, but both died as infants. No one is sure why. A lamp like this one was probably fueled with lard oil. Lard was cheaper than whale oil, but it was smoky and gave out a dimmer light. Bullhorns and antlers were common decorations back in the Old West. You'd kill an animal, eat it, and still have something to show for your efforts. Wyatt Earp was a buffalo hunter, even though it was in violation of an Indian treaty. A buffalo hunt was hard work, but the profits were great, and a man could sell the hides as well as the meat, and the horns would make a prized souvenir. Cooking with a pot-bellied stove was probably the most common method used in the 1880s, but a family might have made their coffee over an open fireplace like this if they were too poor to afford a stove. They'd make their coffee in pots of enameled tin, and as the pots got old, the taste of the metal would flavor the coffee. The coffee was brewed strong, and everyone drank it, even the young children. At the end of a day of mining for silver, fighting crime, or tending a brood of young'uns, you better believe a person would be tired. Sitting by the fire in a chair like this was about as good as relaxing got back then. And such a chair, like every piece of furniture, was shipped from back east or San Francisco, with a dining room chair selling for as much as $2. With prices like these, you can see why a good rocking chair was among a family's most prized possessions.
You know, Wyatt did quite a bit of checking in the mirror when he first started courting Josie Marcus. Yes, sir. Old handsome Wyatt and beautiful Josie made quite a sight strolling along through Tombstone. Of course, Wyatt had some help with his wardrobe. You see, while Wyatt was cultivating a love affair, his wife Mattie was faithfully at home, starching and ironing his shirts.
Typewriters were available in the 1880s, but they didn't catch on right away. At $125, they weren't cheap, and they weren't too reliable either. Some businesses began typing their letters, but many people considered it rude to type correspondence. Wyatt Earp had a beautiful handwriting, but when he was old and unable to write, he dictated his letters to his friend John Flood, who typed them on a machine that looked much like this. Boarding house beds like this one were simple frames with straw-filled mattresses, while feather beds were reserved for the wealthier houses. This may sound uncomfortable, but the fact is a boarding house was a step up from sleeping in a flop house or on the floor of a saloon where you had to bring your own straw. Whether you were working deep in a mine or mending your clothes after work at night, a good lantern like this one was sometimes all the company a person had in the Old West. This china was called spongeware. It was popular in the West, maybe because it added color to the dining room and let people feel a little more city-fied. After dinner, the boarders were on their own. Some of them went out to the saloons, but others passed the time writing letters or reading books at a desk like this. There were plenty to choose from. Dime novels about Buffalo Bill and other adventures, Mark Twain's funny stories, and farmers' almanacs. And the women folk leaned toward writers like Louisa May Alcott. Stranger, I'll give you a silver dollar if you can answer this question right. Step on up to the medicine wagon for a cure of whatever ails you. Baldness? Rheumatism? Evil dreams? Lost manhood? Or just a little cancer or two? The patent medicine salesman would claim to have just the prescription for you. And Doc would sell you a little bottle for just $1. Now, he wasn't a real doctor. I mean, he just played one on the street. And his remedies were mostly useless. But they did make you feel better for a little while. That's because they were between 5 and 95% alcohol. Usually cheap whiskey. You can bet that the doc was a real welcome visitor to the dry towns where liquor establishments were prohibited by law. Crossing the barren Southwest was serious business. No one traveled without enough water. Of course, the patent medicine salesman needed water for elixirs and tonics as well, and would carry it in a barrel like this. Alcohol was the main ingredient of an elixir, but they watered it down to stretch their profits. Barrels could also become a table to display medicine bottles or a stage from which a pitchman would address the crowd. Every patent medicine salesman was accompanied by 2 or 3 assistants, usually a quick-footed male who performed feats of strength and a woman who sang and danced. Music was a part of the entertainment. Speaking of music, did you know you could use a washboard like this to make music after you scrubbed your clothes clean? Playing a washboard involved putting thimbles on your fingers and scraping them across the bumpy metal ridges. These drawers held all the patent medicine salesman's special ingredients. He combined 1 or 2 of them with whiskey and made a remedy for a specific ailment. For instance, the tonic for sore eyes came with the tip of a black cat's tail. You'd put a dab of whiskey on the eyelid and use the tail to wipe it off. For colic, the prescription was a little sip of catnip tea and whiskey. And for headaches, camphor mixed with rye was rubbed into your scalp. Seems like a waste of good liquor to me. These drawers held all... Amazing is the right word for what doctors said they could cure with patent medicines. 1 bottle of elixir claimed it would help ease rheumatism, gout, cancer, boils, fever sores, corns, and something called scald head neuralgia, all for the price of 1 hard-earned U.S. silver dollar. Patent medicine men were 50% con artists and 100% showmen. They showed up in places like Tombstone and Dodge City with fire eaters, sword swallowers, fortune tellers, and minstrels. Anything to attract a crowd. Of course, the more elaborate the show, the fancier the costumes. That explains this extra luggage on the roof of the wagon. You might not think of the Old West as a place of great spiritual elevation, and to some extent you'd be right. The Earp brothers, for instance, were famous for wearing long black parson's coats, but they may or may not have ever set foot inside a church. And their friend Doc Holliday was definitely not a devout man. Looking east from Tombstone, he once pronounced, "I've heard more lies spoken and whispered in church than in all the saloons from here to Dodge City." Meanwhile, looking west from that there Dodge City, some church-going Kansans lamented that there was no Sunday west of Junction City and no God west of Salina. Yet you'd be surprised how many Westerners did slick up in their Sunday go-to-meeting clothes for an hour's redemption from their customary pursuits. The gambling men would think nothing of fortifying themselves with a couple of drinks first to ease the whole thing along, and then after the service, they and the soiled doves would head back on over to the saloons to get back to business. Stained glass windows like these shone real pretty in some Western towns. Just like the stained glass windows all over Europe, these would have Christian images, like saints and scenes from the Bible. And staring at these beautiful images were the Western folk, who were real practical about their religion, whether they were Catholic or Protestant, like Methodist, Baptist, or Presbyterian. Merchants thought steeples and crosses against the sky were good for business, because in everyone's mind, they suggested stability, permanence, and prosperity. It must have worked, because even Jewish businessmen would contribute to the Protestant church's building funds. Church steeples like this one spiked the landscape of some of the bigger Western towns with money to build ornate churches. But more often than not, frontier people gather in log shacks, town halls, saloons, barns, or just worship outdoors under the big sky itself. You see, church-going made you respectable, and it was a kind of glue in bringing people together. Even old Wyatt served as a deacon, for a short time, I should add. Women liked churches because they were safe places to congregate in public. For the many town bachelors and visiting cowboys, these church socials were also one of the few places to get to know marriageable women. Oh, and the food was a lot better than boarding house fare, too. Wyatt Earp, they say, was rather partial to Dodge City's church suppers. One of Tombstone's most colorful characters was the Reverend Endicott Peabody, Wyatt Earp's big admirer and builder of the town's first Episcopal church, St. Paul's. He was a blue-blooded New Englander who preached against sin and depravity. But at 200 pounds, he was also a formidable boxer and baseball player. His athletic reputation and leadership convinced a certain number of miners and gamblers to step into the house of the Lord, at least while Peabody was in town. After 6 months, though, he gave up trying to save the Tombstonians and went back to Massachusetts. If you listen real close, you might hear boots climbing these church steps, walking real respectful like. Now, Western churches, they ranged in size from tiny to grand. In Tombstone, the first church was just a tent, and its pews were just planks on boxes. It had some location problems, too. Wyatt Earp's God-fearing contemporary in town, George Parsons, wrote in his diary, "Talked with the minister a while before service, which now begins at 8 o'clock. Hard work for him to preach on account of dance house racket in the rear." Wouldn't you know it, though? The local gamblers chipped in a good chunk of their money to help build the town's first real church, St. Paul's Episcopal, which was better located and more comfortable. Guess they were kind of hedging their bets on eternity. The family slept behind this window, and many of their prized animals did too. The mattress was stuffed with straw if they had one, but often people slept on the floor in animal hides. Life was plain. The only mirror might be reflection from a bucket of water. Whoops! The rent's due. Better hope business picked up this month. The family slept behind. Pioneer houses were a triumph of ingenuity over adversity. The cabins were made of sod, bits of tin, scraps of lumber. There was one large room behind this window with a dirt floor and little furniture. The kitchen might have had a skillet, coffee pot, and 1 or 2 kettles. Cooking was probably done over an open fire instead of a stove, since a cast iron stove that sold for $25 in the East might cost $200 in a Western community. The wood in the fire might very well have been cut by the Earps. Since Wyatt and Morgan were so poor at one time, they survived by cutting wood for other miners. Pioneer houses were often dark and smoky. The roof leaked whenever it rained, bringing all kinds of insects and snakes inside. The porch was a kind of outdoor parlor where the family could find relief by resting on benches of rough wood planking, like this one.